Hi everybody, I'm Todd. Morning. Thanks for, is it morning? It is still morning, yes. Thanks for coming out on a beautiful Saturday. I know there's like 1,000 other things you could be doing right now. This is a talk called The Developer's Guide to Self-Promotion. And it's a kind of about me. It's about a bunch of things that I've learned over the last 10 years or so about how to promote myself, my products, the things that I'm involved with. But I don't want you to get the wrong idea just because I know how to do some of these things. I am still a straight up 1980s model supercomputer nerd. I have all of the cred to prove it. Check this out. I built a custom computer when I was like 16. There's a stack of magic cards right there on that desk. Pile of video games, obscure music that nobody except other computer nerds had ever heard of, and my awesome stylish haircut. But I am still a nerd today. I've spent the last 10 years of my career, I've stumbled, but I've learned how to promote myself pretty successfully, I think. But it didn't come easy to a developer like me. It was hard. It was putting yourself into very uncomfortable situations again and again, but it has completely transformed my career.
Your projector's out.
Nope.
Oh.
There's no slide here. I'm just talking to you.
Fair enough.
Thanks, man, though. So, this promoting myself and learning how to promote myself has totally transformed my career, and it can do the same for you. Because all of us are building a product of some kind. We're all building a consultancy. We're writing a blog. We're creating a training app. We're building a software product. Or you're just promoting yourself to get that next job, that next promotion. All of us have a product. But there's a giant fallacy that exists in software development communities. I thought this. Most people I talk to think this. Great products sell themselves. Every product I started with, I thought, oh, this is just vastly superior. I still meet people who talk about how Betamax is far superior to VHS. And it's because of this idea. This is so wrong. Great products do not sell themselves. You could have the best product in the world. You could be the best software developer in the world. And you're still not going to get any work unless you know how to promote yourself. As far as I know, all great products that I've ever interacted with have followed these steps. Step one, promoting it before you even started building it. Talking about what this idea you have, how to do it. Then you build it. And you figure out all the stuff you got wrong and you promote it some more. And then you build it some more, and you promote it some more, and you build it some more, and you promote it some more. And unless you do both sides of these, it's probably not going to work out. As developers, we really tend to focus on that build product step. It's fun. It's like we want to geek out on the next thing and add the next feature and polish the next part. And it's a waste of time. After you've hit a certain level of momentum, it's about promoting it. It's about talking about it. It's the only way to really win. And so what I want to do today is I want to tell you 3 stories about myself. And what I learned in each of these stories about how to promote the thing that I was doing. Related, this could also be a story about how hair moved from the top of my head to the bottom of my head. I'm so glad you all laughed at that. But it's important to remember that I'm still learning here, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not like a marketer by trade. I'm not a salesman by trade. That's not my job. However, I've learned some things along the way. Your mileage may vary. So let's start off with the story of Todd the consultant. So a number of years ago, I was working at Big Corp. Names have been changed to protect the guilty. I was working at Big Corp in a place kind of like this. And have you all worked in a place like this before? Yeah. It's not so much the cubes themselves that are bad. The cubes are all right. It's what they represent. It's yearly performance reviews. It's the only way to advance being to become management. It's doing the same project over and over and over again. And probably never getting more than a 3% raise. And so I wanted to branch out beyond that. And I thought, hey, the path to this, consulting. So I went and I got a bunch of douchey slides to put in my douchey clip art of people shaking hands and high fives with executives and that sort of stuff. And I was ready to be a consultant. But the big question when you go out and become a consultant is, how do you find a client? Now I don't have a project manager slapping my next week's work on me. How do I find what I'm going to go and do? And so I got into professional speaking. I went to conferences. I went to user groups. I talked about the stuff that I knew. If I could name a single thing that totally transformed my career, this is it. Going and talking to people in formats just like this. Having the opportunity to talk with brilliant and engaged people from all around the world in tons of different industries has opened up all kinds of doors. But it does not come easy, especially at first. In fact, probably for the first 2 or 3 years that I spoke at conferences, I had a little flask of bourbon in my backpack. And maybe 10, 15 minutes before a talk, I would take quite a few hits off of that. Just to loosen up, just chill out. Now, I don't have a flask of bourbon on me today, so I've gotten past that. But maybe I should have had that bourbon. But having that thing to just loosen you up and get you into that thing initially was awesome. Speaking at conferences, professional speaking levels you up. And it's easy to get started. You can visit your local user group. There's 1,000 user groups in the Twin City area that are all looking for speakers to do something. And you can practice there. You can go and you can share what you know. You can get more comfortable speaking in front of audiences and presenting your ideas. And once you get good at that, you can speak at local conferences. Local conferences will lead to regional conferences, and regional conferences will lead to worldwide conferences. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. And what's great about this flow is that there's these awesome feedback loops. You score one really solid performance at a top-level conference, and it unlocks all kinds of doors and makes everything else easier. But you're never going to get here unless you start at the top. So going to your local user groups, speaking, sharing what you know, unlock doors. Go to the after party. Go to the after party. This, after parties, social hours, after parties, all of those things, this is where you meet people who will unlock doors. Boundaries are down. People are having a few drinks. Nobody's being super professional and polished anymore. And you meet all kinds of amazing people. People who can advance you, can partner with you, can teach you things. Why does all of this even matter? Again, blank slide. Why does all of this matter? Why do you care? For a lot of us, it's really uncomfortable to go up on stage and talk to other people, especially people you don't all know. I don't think I've met anybody in this room before. And so that's kind of uncomfortable. Usually there's a couple of friends in the audience. But why does it matter to put yourself into this situation? Why should you care? Because eventually you're going to need to sell something. You're going to need to sell yourself for a job. You're going to need to sell your next training video. You're going to need to sell a product. And selling to your friends is easier than selling to strangers. By the time we're done with this, we're going to have had an hour conversations together. And we're going to be friends. Not in the BFFs we go out together and have a drink all the time, although maybe. But we're going to be friends in the terms that I will recognize you, you will recognize me, and when you go off and do something in the community, I will want to support you because I'm oh yeah, I met that person at Drupal Camp. And you'll want to support me the next time you see something because you're oh, I saw Todd speak about promotions at Drupal Camp. And we want the people in our communities to succeed. It's just a natural tendency for all of us. And so expanding your network of friends is going to make it easier for you to do whatever you want to do later. Building your audience is exponential. As you get bigger and bigger stages and bigger groups of people that you hang out with, you'll be introduced to more and more people. And your audience will just grow. Now, I didn't know any of this at the time. I was really just having a good time. I was going out to conferences, I was trying to get work. But in retrospect, this has been the platform that everything else that I've done afterwards has come from. And so I cannot even imagine a endeavor that you could set out on in the technology world where public speaking couldn't help you, won't benefit you later. So that is the advice of the first stories about me. The next story I want to tell you is about Todd the entrepreneur. So after a few years of consulting, I started recognizing a common set of problems. I mainly did JavaScript consulting. So I would help big companies in the area build JavaScript apps. And this was at the era of just starting the JavaScript renaissance, Backbone.js and Knockout.js. The idea of building an app entirely in JavaScript was just kind of hitting fashion. And so I would build a lot of these apps. I think I built 7 or 10 of them, somewhere in there, over several years. And they all had these same kind of needs. The first need is that JavaScript kind of sucks sometimes. And it breaks a lot. And in ways that you don't always understand. And so for every client, we would build these little error monitoring, error tracking services, where when the end user would blow up in production, we would get like some sort of logging messages back as developers so that we could try and fix it. And so this idea kind of beat into our heads, and several years after that, we decided to start a company around that idea called Track.js, where we packaged up this thing that every one of our clients seemed to need and pulled it out of the individual code bases and said, here is a standalone service that we can plug into any of our clients and will just work. Now, we decided to build this nights and weekends. We spent probably 4 months of very long nights and giving up weekends with our families to build the first prototype of Track.js. And we were thinking that this idea is just so brilliant that when we're done with it, money is just going to fall out of the heavens. Like, venture capitalists are just going to slap $1 million checks down on the table. Customers are just going to come out of everywhere. Everyone's just going to sign up. Because that's this idea that so many developers have, is that this is a great idea. Clearly, it's just going to be an instant success. But we launched it, and nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. Like, nobody signed up for it. Nobody covered us. There were no venture capitalist checks that hit the table. Nothing happened. And for a while, we fell into the same loop that I talked about earlier of chasing technology. We kept trying to bolt on one more feature. Or maybe if we move this thing to the cloud. Or maybe if we track some piece of data slightly differently, that's just going to be the one feature to take off. And it wasn't until we figured out that my job on Track.js shouldn't be to code. The code is done. It is good enough. My partners can keep running on that. My job needed to be all of these other things. We needed a marketer. We needed a salesman. We needed an evangelist, whatever that means. We needed a support person. We needed all of these parts of running a business in order to succeed. But I had no idea how to do any of these things. I was totally lost. So I went and I started reading, trying to figure out how do I talk about Track.js? How do I do this? Who is Track.js? When I introduce myself, when I talk about what I do, how should I introduce myself? And I went to probably my favorite mind in the concept of marketing, Fake Grimlock. How many people have heard of Fake Grimlock? It's kind of a weird underground startup-y thing. He's on Twitter. She, I don't know, it's a giant robot dinosaur that talks about startups. I don't really know. It's on Twitter as @FakeGrimlock. And it's hilarious and truthful and honest. And it talks about all of these things about how to represent yourself truly and how to build a company that's actually going to change the world. And one of my favorite things that it has to say about it is this quote here, talking about what a minimum viable personality needs to be. Now, I'm going to do my best to quote Fake Grimlock as Fake Grimlock would speak. Most important step for build product is build product. Second most important step is build personality for product. No have personality, boring product no one wants. Your products on the internet, whether it's you, a software product, a training, or whatever, there's bread and there's bacon. Always be bacon. Don't be the boring thing that you know you need. Like, you need bread probably to live and get enough calories for the day, but you want bacon. Be bacon. So, Fake Grimlock talks about how do you define your minimum viable personality, and it's answering these 3 questions. How will you change the world? What do you stand for? And what do you hate? Because you don't really have an interesting personality unless you are against something. You can't just be bubbly and generic and positive, because that's how brands happen. Personalities, people are against things. People have enemies. And so describing a personality should also have those things. So I went to think about what should the personality of Track.js be? What are the things that we stand for as a company? We want to build a better web. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. People are moving more and more into JavaScript, and so we want to make it suck maybe a little bit less. What do we stand for? As we built our product, we always focused on simplicity and having fun. Like, we're not a super powerful, like, all-purpose monitoring tool that can do everything, but we'll tell you the easy, obvious things about what went wrong, and we're not going to make you spend hours and hours learning boring documentation to do it. And what do we hate? We hate when you click on the checkout button and it doesn't do anything. We hate when you type in a search and it returns an empty page. We hate stupid errors like E is undefined that you can't debug. And we express these things when we're speaking online. Once you have that, you have enough to start, but you have to iterate. Spread your message, talk like whatever you want your personality to be, and then figure out what's resonating with your audience. When you express an idea, if you don't get any feedback, if you get negative feedback, take it and learn from it. This isn't this isn't a static thing that never changes. Once you know who you are, you can go out and start thinking about building an audience. Now, the great thing about building an audience for Track.js was that I already had a platform. I already had an established audience from public speaking, and that audience carries through really well. As you move through the different phases in your career, the things that you did before, bring them along with. There's no reason like you can't continue building on what you're doing. And so I had a pretty established audience on social network and public speaking, about what I was doing with JavaScript construction, and so bringing that into JavaScript error monitoring fed really nicely. The idea of building an audience is that you have to remember that people are always the most interested in themselves. I'm most interested in myself, you're most interested in yourself, and that's okay. But we need to take the hint. When we want to spread our message, we have to talk about the things that we want, that our audience is interested in. So to do that, first we need to find them. Who should our audience be? Who are the people who you want to engage with? Who are the people who resonate with your message? For Track.js, the people who we wanted to find were people who maybe don't do JavaScript as their primary language, but maybe people who are a little afraid of JavaScript. It's their secondary thing. They're building something, and then they're building something in some platform, and they're forced to use JavaScript. JavaScript has been this thing growing on the top of their application without them necessarily realizing it over the past 5-10 years. Once you know who your audience is, create things for them. Don't create things for you. Don't just talk about yourself. But create articles and blog posts and tutorials and example projects and all kinds of things that apply, that they are going to be interested in, that is going to resonate with them. And then go talk to them. Go where your audience is going to be. They're not going to come to you. They're not going to come to your site. They're not going to come to your social network. They're not going to follow you on Twitter. You have to go to them. Engage them where they're going to be. Go to the conferences that they go to. Go to the, participate on their online forums. Go to other sites, go to Stack Overflow or GitHub or whatever, and engage with them. And then continue to iterate. Figure out what's working and what's not. And here's a perfect example of this. This, right now. I'm going to be very meta for a moment. I've identified a good audience for Track.js as developers peripheral to JavaScript. Things like Drupal. And I made something for you. I made something about how to promote yourself that I hope is going to be valuable for you and that you'll take some lessons from this. And I've come here where you will be at Drupal Camp to present this to you. And hopefully this message is going to resonate with you and we'll talk more and become friends. And it will be easier to talk about Track.js and other things that I do and you do later on. Here's the example of me building an audience right now. Meta. All right, an elevator pitch. Once you know who you are and you know who to talk to, if you do it just right, you'll have the opportunity to pitch the thing that you do to them. Either it'll be in an elevator, as the name implies, or at a bar, or at a conference, or wherever. You'll have a chance to quickly tell somebody else, what do you do and why should they care? And so you need to have a concise practice pitch ready so that you can explain that. So if you're in this situation, you have a minute, or you have a drink, or you have a conversation to tell people, 1, what do you do? 2, how am I better for it? Remember, people are most interested in themselves. They don't want to know why your product is so amazing. They want to know how is it going to make them better. And finally, what's the next step? If you hook them with 1 and 2, where should they go and get for more information? But you're going to get rejected a lot. It's going to be very hard, and it's going to be very sad. But it's okay. You'll pitch 100 people, and hopefully a few of them will turn into fantastic business relationships for you. It's just like asking somebody out. You're going to get rejected a lot, probably. But eventually, an amazing relationship can come from it. And with all things, iterate. I've been iterating the term iterate. Iterate your pitch. If you've done it 10 times, if you've done it 50 times, and nobody's interested, change it. Fix it. Try something new. Try a different approach. I want to show you all a pitch. So my pitch for Track.js started with a set of business cards that I would take to a bar. And I would be at a conference, I would go to the after parties, and I'd be talking to people who I respected in the JavaScript world. I wanted to make sure that some key people in the industry knew who we were and what we did. And so what we did was kind of a technical thing. I didn't have a good grasp on how to explain it in just words quickly. And so I used a prop. And so I want to show you what we did. Hey, I'm Todd from Track.js. This is my business card now. Track.js is awesome. So this is a JavaScript error, right? E is undefined, scripts.js, line 1. It's terrible. JavaScript has not been good about giving us good error information. And it sucks that this is all you have to go with to fix a customer problem. But the first thing is knowing that it happened. Because these errors, they don't happen in your servers where you have great logging tools. No, they happen in your users' browsers, and probably cracking one, like IE9. So the first thing Track.js does for you is let you know that it happened. And we tell you interesting statistics, like 80% of your customers who are on IE9 are running into this particular error on URL. But that's just a start, because I don't know where to begin debugging E is undefined. So Track.js is listening to events that happened before the error to give you better context. Track.js polyfills and records console and makes it safe to use in all browsers. The console allows you to log on your client-side app like you log on your server and record interesting events and state changes in your application. In this case, we know that when the user first loaded the page, your application started initializing the user form. A few seconds later, your customer began interacting with your app and entered 16 email characters into this input. Track.js records interesting metadata about these user actions, but we never record the actual values to protect user privacy. After entering the email, the customer clicked on this button, and this AJAX event began, going to /API/users. It lasted 3,500 milliseconds before coming back with a 500. And that was the last thing that happened before this error occurred, which indicates the error probably has something to do with handling the response.
We package all this information up with other interesting context about the browser and application for your developers. And with it, they can reproduce the exact series of events that led a customer to a problem and fix it quick. So that's Track.js. We're protecting 1 trillion pages a month and making the web a better place. I'd love to help you too. Check us out at trackjs.com.
So these are my business cards. I use a company called MooCards. There's a few other ones, but MooCards lets you print a different back on every individual business cards. So we put together this idea of like telling a story about an error that we can solve using the back of my business cards. And so I have these in my pocket, going to the after parties, going to a conference, going to a place where I knew people would be, so that I could tell this story. If I had the opportunity to pitch somebody, I could just whip this out on the back of my hand and give a whole pitch about here's what Track.js is and how it works. And at the end, I give them a business card, and hopefully this turns into something. And so having something ready gives you this opportunity to like communicate a really powerful message to your audience, should you have the opportunity. Maybe you need something gimmicky like this, maybe you don't. But don't be afraid to go there, and don't be afraid to try new things. There are a number of people who come up to me at events and say that they saw me do this like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and that it was the most ridiculous and awesome demo that they had ever seen. And so doing something that isn't boring works. And so you should try it. Once you've given somebody your pitch, you have an audience, they might come and look you up. They might go and find your website. They want to know more information about you and what you do. And so I want to talk a bit about how we've learned to build our pages in order to do that more effectively. And I don't mean page design in terms of like layout and CSS and graphics and that sort of thing. I mean what to think about when building a page that's for converting a lead into a customer. And so how I like to think about pages is that every page in my site should do a few things. First, it should target a specific audience. It shouldn't just be for everybody. Think about who is this page for? Is it for customers, or is it for new users, or is it for leads? Is it for support people, or is it for investors? Is it for media? Whatever. Who is that page for? Once you know who the page is for, the people who will come to this page will have found you through one of 3 ways, probably. Either they know who you are personally. They've seen you at a conference, whatever. They are looking for you. They went and they typed in Track.js into their Google search bar, and they landed on us directly. Or they know our market. They're like, hey, I need a JavaScript error monitoring tool. I'm going to type in JavaScript error monitoring or any of a number of variant questions and come in through that. Or they have a problem. They're like, how do I fix script error on my website? And so knowing how the user has gotten to you can help you narrow down how to speak to that audience. How do you need to describe your problem? Once you have that audience coming in, figure out what your goal is for that person. What do you want them to do on your webpage? They can't do everything. You can't say, I want them to do this, I want them to download my white paper, I want them to give me their email address, and I want them to sign up. They're not going to do all of them. What is the one thing you want to focus them into? What do we want them to do? I want to give you another example, because I think concrete examples of these things are illustrative. So I'm going to show you an example of Track.js. So here is our web page. This is the page of somebody who I believe has hit our page and knows who we are, which is the majority of people who actually hit our site. So these people have landed on our page, and my goal for them, my goal for these potential users who already know who we are, is I want them to start a free trial of our service. Is that obvious?
Yes.
Above the fold, I have this picture of some developers, some JavaScript developers. I photoshopped that sticker in. That's my elite photoshopping skills. This is like standard stock photo, and I photoshopped a JavaScript sticker in. So this is some developers scared at some crazy crap they're seeing online, and I'm telling them to fix their JavaScript, and the first thing I want them to do is I want them to start a free trial. And if they're not ready to do that yet, I try and convince them. I try and tell them, what they'll be able to do if they use our service. They'll know when errors happen. They'll be able to understand user impact and recreate and fix bugs. And I'm trying to tell them more about our service. I'm giving them some social proof of like, hey, here's a bunch of other companies that I hope you respect also use us. So we're not this weird fly-by-night operation. You can actually trust us. And if that doesn't work, I try and convert them again. And I have this great big counter here on the bottom of here's all the people we helped. And I think that's a powerful message. But I know that my audience are developers. And they're not going to trust that. They're going to be like, you just put a stupid counter on your page. There's no way this is real. And so, because I know my audience are developers and that's how they're going to think, I left my audience a little message. Now we go into that big counter number because they're snooping around on how does that work. I left them a message straight up in my markup. Hey there, developer. As I'm sure you know, it wouldn't be performant for me to make a call to my system every time some random from the internet stops by. So this is the equation based on it. Here's a known start date, here's a known start amount, and here's how fast we were growing at that point. And here's the calculation. And if you want the exact number, just email us, hello@trackjs.com. And a lot of people will actually email us and be like, I saw that message in your markup, that's hilarious. That's it. Like, I don't even need the number. That's just funny, and I wanted to let you know. So knowing who your audience is and playing to them, use like all kinds of like weird, gimmicky tricks. It's fun, and they like it, especially if you're targeting other developers. And with all things, iterate. Keep trying new things with your page until they work. If you're finding that nobody's scrolling down, nobody's clicking on anything, try something new. If nobody had reacted to that gimmicky thing in the comments, if nobody had ever emailed us, we probably would have taken it out and been like, nobody cares. But the first day we put it up, somebody emailed us and said that was hilarious. And so it's been there, and it's been there for years at this point because it's funny. But don't overdo it. Again, we are developers, and we are going to want to take and fine-tune our page forever. We're going to want to try all of the latest header markup to improve our SEO. We're going to want to try HTTP2 to shave 10 milliseconds off of our load time. You can spend years just fine-tuning your web page, and that doesn't necessarily matter. Focus on what's actually going to improve you. Our web page isn't HTTP2. We don't have all the latest headers, but it doesn't matter. We've hit a point where it converts well enough that spending that incremental more time isn't necessarily going to help us convert better as a product. And so don't fall down that rabbit hole of chasing all the latest tech. Now I want to tell you a third story. Now the second story isn't quite over. I'm obviously still working on Track.js. All of those things are continuing to iterate. I'm continuing to try new things. This thing is one of the new things I'm trying about, talking about how we promote ourselves as a part of promoting myself, which is a weird meta thing, and I'm not entirely sure how it's going to work out yet, but we'll see after a couple of months and how well it does. But now I want to move on to a third story about Todd the producer. So through a lot of my relationships with conferences and public speaking, I began to understand that there is a need at conferences. There is a need for a safe space for the speakers. A place where they can tell jokes and try out material. Stuff that they wouldn't normally present in a serious, formal presentation venue. A place where everyone can just relax and have a beer and chill out at the end of a conference. And so I started this thing called PubConf. Has anybody heard of PubConf? We've only done one of them in Minneapolis, but we've done 7 of them around the world at this point. PubConf is a conference after party and comedy variety show. I go to a conference, I partner with a conference somewhere, and I invite 10 of their most entertaining speakers to come to the bar after the conference and do a 5-minute talk using the Ignite format. They get 20 slides, 15 seconds per slide, and they auto-advance. So the speakers are kind of panicking. They don't have a clicker. They don't have, notes and everything to like rehearse on. They have to keep going. And the focus is on being funny and entertaining and laughing at stupid trends and saying that internet security is pointless anyway. Why should we even try? And microservices are dumb and don't spend money on the cloud, and just being weird and hyperbolical and satirical, and it's fun. That too. So that's what PubConf is. We get some sponsors to help us have an open bar and some food, and it's just a great time. And in a way, PubConf is an extension of Track.js. So a lot of companies eventually grow to a point where they have their own conference, right? Like Microsoft has Build, Twilio has Signal, but Track.js has PubConf, which I think reflects who we are as a company, is that we're just trying to have a good time and make development more fun for everybody. And so I went out about 2.5 years ago now to start developing the PubConf brand so that we could grow this thing. And so, like with Track.js, I started with Fake Grimlock's minimum viable personality to define who do I want PubConf to be. I went too fast. How will you change the world? The idea behind PubConf is I want to build relationships between tech communities. So I would always partner with a conference, but it was always open to the public to show up to PubConf. I would just use the speakers and the attendees who'd come into town for that conference as my base. But I'm trying to build connections between the .NET community and the Drupal community, or the Drupal community and the WordPress community, or the .NET community and the Java community, because we're all talking about a lot of the same things, but there's these weird boundaries that exist between all of these groups. And I was trying to break that down. What do we stand for? Nerdy jokes, beers. That's what we're standing for. This is a fun thing. What do we hate? Fake people and mindless trends. So a staple of what we do at PubConf is we take whatever is the new hot thing that there's 1,000 conference talks about, we say that it's dumb and it's bad, and we make jokes about why you shouldn't use it. And this is the representation of our brand. This is how we social. So PubConf goes to distilleries and watches bourbon get bottled. PubConf talks about some of our favorite speakers, like How to Code Like an Asshole by a now Microsoft evangelist. Maxing Out the Ballmer Peak. Is that XKCD? No? All right. PubConf sends out a Christmas card to all the attendees with our favorite gluten-free, dairy-free, fat-free eggnog recipe. And PubConf talks about hangover cures for the day after PubConf. And this resonates with the PubConf audience. So I want to talk about how to social, how to interact on social networks as PubConf. Here's the rules that I've kind of developed. First, be positive. Nobody likes the jerk on Twitter who just argues with everything you say. Be funny, be encouraging, and engage with other people. If you don't have anything nice to say, just stay out of the conversation or make a joke about the situation. Like, here's an example. We were tweeting about one of our upcoming events. There was a talk called JavaScript, it used to be bad, now it's just awful. And somebody, chipped in about asking some doctor that they knew how they could save us. And our prescription of the problem was beer. Be real. Nobody wants to interact with a bot or a brand on Twitter. It's boring. Talk like a real human would talk. If it's your audience, swear. If it's not your audience, don't. But communicate how your audience would expect another human to talk with them. Stay active and develop relationships with your followers. Develop inside jokes. And there's tons of tools that can help stay active and be engaging. Some of my favorites are Hootsuite and Buffer. They allow you to time out jokes to go out at different times that can kickstart conversations with different groups. Here's an example. this was a tweet that we scheduled to go off about 2 hours before our latest event. I used a tool called Hootsuite to do it, and it targeted both the PubConf hashtag and the conference that we had partnered with, and just, hey, I'm parched. Let's go to the bar. And lastly, be focused. You can't be about everything all at once. So, PubConf avoids the controversies not related to you. There's a famous quote that is often misattributed to Michael Jordan. He did not actually say this. But the quote is, Republicans buy sneakers too. And it's like, if it's not your place to fight that battle, if it's not going to advance your position, the things that you stand for, or it's against the things that you hate, if it's not part of your personality, maybe just stay out of it. Because there's always going to be people on the other side of that argument that might have been your customers too. And it wasn't a relevant controversy for you to take a position on it. And lastly, it's okay to repeat yourself. Focusing, staying on message. Don't be worried about tweeting the same thing twice or tweeting a variant of the same thing twice. Because most of us aren't obsessively checking our social networks. Most people aren't obsessively checking your feed and will call you out if you've tweeted the same thing twice. You're talking to different people every time. Here's an example. We tweet out this just about, a few days before just about every one of our events. And it's slightly different. We use slightly different hashtags, but we basically tweet out this exact thing every time. And it always gets good engagement. And we always get people who respond to us and make jokes about it after the fact. All right, I want to just briefly show all of these social things are designed to bring people back to our website. So here's what we're trying to do. We're engaging people socially so that they will come back and hopefully buy a ticket on our website. And so when we're working on something, we're targeting whatever event is coming up next. So our next event is happening in Kansas City. And we're partnered with a conference called KCDC down there. And so here is the website for that. Now, tickets aren't open yet. So right now, the thing I'm wanting people to do is join our wait list, which is basically give me your email address so that I can market more effective to you later. If not, it would be to buy a ticket right now. And so I'm trying to, most people who come to the PubConf website probably already know who we are, have a good idea of what we do because of our social engagement and because of my presence at the conference. But if they don't, they can scroll down and learn more about it. So here's what we are. It's Ignite Talks, music, free beer, amazing developers at the pub. And here's some of our talks. And as soon as you start reading them, you quickly realize that hey, these are some names that I recognize, but that's not the kind of thing they would normally talk about. And it is not entirely safe for a normal conference to use those sort of talks. And so that is the website that we are trying to bring people to. So I want to talk about how does the mechanics of that website actually work. And for that, I'm going to need to get into some marketing words, which can be scary. But don't worry, I'm going to try and put it in the frame of software. So I want to talk about... It's not working. I want to talk about the funnel. My impression is that this audience is probably more familiar with the funnel than a lot of audiences I talk to. How many of you have talked about the funnel in your jobs? I imagine a lot of you build websites. That's kind of the core thing, is you're building e-commerce sites or marketing sites or blogging sites or that sort of thing. So I imagine this word is probably more familiar to you. But I want to dig into what does this actually mean beyond a generic buzzword. I like to think of the funnel as a piece of software architecture. It's a system just like anything else that gets inputs and outputs. The inputs in this case are leads. People who might be interested in you, your product, or your service will fall into the top of the funnel. And hopefully, if your funnel does really, really well, you'll get a bunch of customers who pour out the bottom, and are willing to give you some cash. And so this is a model for all of the things you can do to sell, on how to acquire, how to activate, and how to convert your customers. And so if we zoom in on it, there's all kinds of things that are actually in the funnel. And what those things are will be dependent on you and what you're doing. But typically the funnel starts with a landing page. Where are the people going to end up? And when you're building that landing page, remember the rules that I mentioned. It needs to have an audience. Who is this for? And what do you want them to do? What you want them to do can be described as these set of goals. Do they look at your feature list? Do they subscribe to your newsletter? Do they click on, I want to start a trial? Whatever your things are, think about your steps that you want your customers, your potential customers, to go through. We all have a funnel. It's whether or not you know what yours is. And so thinking through the steps that you want a potential user to take is important so that you can measure it and improve it later. So for example, here is the PubConf funnel. Here is how I think of the pub. The user comes in, and I hope they land on an event page. I usually don't want people to just come to pubconf.io because there's very few people who are interested in doing both PubConf Minneapolis and PubConf Kansas City and PubConf London. Like, the audience of people who will go to all three events is not big. Usually I want people to come to an event page. I want them to land on PubConf Minneapolis. And I want them to scroll down and look at the speakers. And maybe I want them to sign up for my mailing list. Some of them will click out to my Eventbrite page to look at the tickets, and then a few of them will buy them. And so those are the steps that I'm seeing my users take in order to convert. So if we zoom that back out to whatever your funnel would be, you have to think about, you can define your steps and what do they do. But how do you know that they work? And how do you know where to focus your time and iterate and improve? If this is a software system, how do we know our other software systems work? Typically, we'll write tests, and we'll have a test suite for it. And so analytics is the test suite for your funnel. You add a piece of analytics tooling, and it will test your assumptions. It'll test how well your users are achieving these sort of these steps in your funnel. But these analytics tools are often just implemented as a JavaScript thing. And JavaScript does not always work great. There's lots of options for what to do here. I'm sure most of you know some of these things. Google Analytics is free and everywhere, and most people have used it. There's also great tools from Mixpanel and Intercom and Kissmetrics that are focused on different kinds of products, gathering certain kinds of information. And a lot of times you just need to roll something custom. As you get larger, there might be just some kind of data that you can't capture anywhere else, and you want to capture it your own. And that's okay too. But it's important to know that when you're adding analytics to your funnel, when you're testing it, don't just dump it in and test everything. Because it's just going to generate tons and tons of noise. And it's going to hide the data that you care about most. Write tests using your analytics tools for your funnel. If your funnel is checking whether or not a user goes to your mailing list or adds themselves to your mailing list, there should be something specific in your analytics tools that is measuring what percentage of my users are added to the mailing list. You shouldn't have to dig that information out. It shouldn't be something special that you check once in a while. The top highlights of the analytics system that you configure should reflect the funnel as you see it. And don't worry so much about capturing everything else until you need it. Unlike tests in a software system, whether or not your funnel is passing or failing is not entirely obvious. Because it doesn't give you just a red or a green icon when it's working. You get numbers like this, and I don't necessarily know if this is passing or failing until I put it in context of what everything else is doing. So let me again use the example of PubConf. So here is again the PubConf funnel and all of the different steps that I'm caring about. Now I've attached Google Analytics to this, and what I'm doing is I'm measuring different steps here. And so I measure I'm just rounding this out to 1,000 for easy math. I get 1,000 people who hit the PubConf Minneapolis event page. And 196 of them will view the speaker page, which is a custom event, or view the speaker section, which is a custom event that I programmed of when the page has scrolled so that the speaker section is in view, it fires off an event to Google so I know that the user has seen that section. 196 people will do that. 140 will go out and look at tickets on the Eventbrite page, and 118 will buy one. And so if I bring that out to percentages, I only get 19% to take that first step from my funnel. But once they've taken that step, I have fairly good high percentage rates. I have 71% will go on from viewing the speakers into viewing the tickets, and 84% of people who view a ticket buy a ticket. And so if I was to subjectively attach a passing or failing test to this, I would say, hey, I'm doing pretty good down there. I'm pretty happy with 70%. But that 19% is harsh. I'm getting a lot of people who drop off. I'm probably not making quite as good of a case to stay on the PubConf webpage as I could. But this is all subjective. And it's up to you to decide what is passing and what is failing based on you, your audience, your market, the commitment you're asking. If you're asking somebody to throw down $10,000 for some high-end business-to-business thing, 19% could be amazing conversion rate for you. But I'm asking people to give me $30 and come to a party. And I'm kind of expecting a little higher turnout rate than that. So let's go back to the funnel. So we get leads in the top, and some percentage of them will get churned out before they become customers. So if we can figure out how much it costs us to get a lead into the top of this, we could turn this into like a machine that just prints money. And that'd be awesome. So let's see if we can figure out the math on how that works. So what does it cost to get a lead? Well, it depends on how you're getting them. So in the event of something like this, like a conference, I could figure out what it costs me to get a lead from DrupalCamp. I could say, all right, here's how much time I spent preparing this. Here's my time commitment here's my time commitment to prepare this talk and to come here. Here is what I value my time at. Here is an approximation of how many of you will go on to my website after the fact and do that sort of thing. But there's tons of approximations and a lot of fuzzy math in there. And valuing your time is something that didn't quite make the cut for my edit of this presentation. So instead, I'm going to focus on something far more concrete, advertising. Advertising can give you a real solid number on what does a lead cost. It's called cost per click. What does it cost you for somebody to click on your ad, to come to your website and see your thing? For PubConf, Twitter is a really effective advertising channel because that tends to be where people, developers who like beer and making snarky jokes, like to hang out. So I advertise on Twitter. So I'm going to actually show you some live data from Twitter. Here is our most recent campaign from PubConf Oslo. I haven't started the campaign for Kansas City yet. Where I put together a set of Twitter ads that featured stupid pictures of our speakers that I just terribly photoshopped into a background. And I just targeted basically people in Norway and people who followed those speakers themselves. And then I ran all 10 of their ads simultaneously. And I could look at each individual ad maybe and see like how did they all perform, but I'm more interested in the total. And so the total for me is that I spent about $590, but it cost me $1.31 to get a click on Twitter. So that's kind of interesting, but I don't know what that means yet. But let's take that back and plug it into the presentation or into our funnel, and we'll see how that goes. As of the earlier writing of it, it was $1.18. So my cost per click fell a little bit in the last week. Let's go with 118. So let's say the cost per click of my Twitter advertising was $1.18. So I pay $1.18 for a user to start into the top of my funnel. But my funnel isn't 100% efficient. For every 1,000 people that come to the top, I don't get 1,000 tickets out the bottom, even though that would be awesome. As we saw earlier from those numbers, I don't know if anybody added them all together, the actual conversion rate for those 1,000 people that came out the top, I get 118 that come out the bottom. I get 118 tickets sailed for every 1,000 people. And so my conversion rate of my funnel is 11.81%. And so if I'm paying $1.18 to get somebody to come in, and 11% is my conversion rate, that means my cost to get one customer can be just divided across, right? It's about $10. I pay about $10 in advertising to get one customer to buy a ticket for PubConf. So that's interesting, but we still don't quite know enough to know if that's worth it. So this is what it costs me to buy a customer. So we put this on here. That's called the cost to acquire. But we still don't really know if this is a good idea, and we still don't know what a customer is worth to us. So let's zoom in on that. Let's take a look. So out the bottom of our funnel come customers. And so we need to know what they are worth to us. And that's a term called lifetime value. Figuring out what the lifetime value of your customers are is dependent on what kind of business you have. If you are a blog, your lifetime value would be based on maybe the advertising revenue that you get for advertising on your blog based across the number of visitors you get. But for PubConf, I can calculate the value based on my ticket sales and my return rate. So I typically charge about $30 for a ticket to PubConf. Some events it's a little bit more, some events it's a little bit less. It kind of depends on how much beer costs in the city that I'm in. In Norway, it is a lot. So the tickets are quite a bit more. And then, for anybody who comes to a PubConf, I get about half of them will go on and show up the next year. Again, it depends a little bit per city. But if I spend some money to acquire a customer the first time, about half of them will just come back naturally and I don't have to advertise to them again. And so I can figure out what my value because of that is that I'll get the $30 from the first ticket, plus because I probably don't have to advertise to half of them the next time, I can count that forward. So I get about $45 in lifetime value of a customer, of somebody falling out the bottom of the PubConf funnel. And so if I know what that is, if I know what my lifetime value is, now I can start figuring out, is it worth it for me to pay for more of them? But as a quick rule of thumb, you can't spend all of the money that you get from a customer on acquiring. If you make $100 off of a customer and you spend $100 to get that customer, you're not making any money. You're losing money. You're not paying your salary. You're not paying your operational costs. You're not growing. So as a quick rule of thumb, this again will depend on your business, but you should definitely be spending less than a third of the lifetime value to acquire them. If you're spending more than that, you're probably just losing money on every customer you get because you don't have enough to pay for the service or the services that you're providing for them. So I'm going to use that rule of thumb for PubConf here. So if I put this all together, I spend $1 to get a lead. 11% conversion rate makes me pay $10 to acquire a customer. But I get $45 in value out the end. And so $10 is way less than a third. I'm making $35 net for every time I do this. Or if I restate that, what this has allowed me to do is turn PubConf into an architecture that lets me take $10 and put it into the PubConf machine, and I get $45 of beer out the other side. And that's pretty awesome. So those were the 3 stories that I have. These were 3 stories where I shared things about how to start professional speaking. Again, it is the most transformative thing that has ever happened in my career. Second, how to go about building your audience. Building your audience is valuable because selling to your friends will be easier than selling to strangers, no matter what you choose to go out and do later. And third, once you have something to sell, here's how you measure whether or not you're any good at selling it. You got to know when people hit your website or look up your thing, look up your service, look up your product, is the message that you're saying relevant about it? I hope this was valuable for you. Like I said, this talk is very meta because it's an experiment for me. I'm teaching things that I think I've learned about promoting and marketing, both as a way to have you all grow, but also to promote me and my thing. So I happily welcome any feedback about how this went for you. This was the Developer's Guide to Promoting Themselves. My name's Todd Gardner. I'm Todd H. Gardner on Twitter, and thanks very much for coming. And I know I'm like over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions.